Martand Shardul, first Policy Director of Global Wind Energy Council, India, supporting wind development and a clean energy transition. A former fellow at TERI SAS, he completed his Masters in Sustainable Development Practice in 2012. He worked with the Global Lighting a Billion Lives initiative that enabled poor people's access to clean energy and impacted over 5 million lives in South Asia and Africa. He has over 10 years of experience in public policy, clean energy analytics, and digital transformation in India and abroad.
Warm welcome once again. So, as we all know that you have been working in the field of renewable energy and sustainability for quite a long time now. So, could you please share your sustainability story with us? Like, mainly what fascinated you to enter into this particular field of work?
My journey after engineering started in the software, which is quite a traditional thing in today's time. The incidents happened when I was at IIT Guwahati, and they were going to start with their master's program, which is called Masters in Arts. Masters in Arts, and again it was about development studies, MA in development studies. This was first of its time course and first of its kind course at IIT Guwahati. And I was supposed to answer 2 out of 3 questions. All of these were subjective. One of them was what is poverty and what is India doing on poverty. And there were 2 more questions, but this one is something which I really remember very well. So after the exam ended, just like any examination hall, there were people who gathered outside the room and then they started discussing answers. And I was coming from an engineering background. So for me, it was like, why are they even discussing? Who doesn't know what is poverty, Garibi in this country coming from India, developing Asia? But to my fascination, I went there. So I was listening to their discussions, and these were intellectuals from JNU, from Cambridge, and from other places. So to my surprise, they said, if I can't vote, then I am in a state of poverty. If my opinion is not considered, if I'm not allowed to speak for myself or for my community, then I'm in a state of poverty. And I was born and brought up in Indian Oils Township. So even in my childhood, when Bihar was struggling with access to electricity, so I had almost 24 hours access to electricity, and my friends and neighbors outside the township in Indian Oil had to live on kerosene wick lamps. So this was a complete contrast. Imagine, even I have studied on kerosene wick lamps, but you imagine living in a situation wherein you live in your gated society, and just outside the gated society, after the daylight hours, everything is gone for a toss. Life comes to a standstill after maybe 7 p.m. or something. So I decided that I have to electrify my village. And as the course progressed, we were sent out to Uttar Pradesh, wherein I started working with Care India for a brief period of time. And here I was working on a project which was called Sure Start Project, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, one of the landmark projects in India. Again, here I was working with expecting and lactating women, and with the SAS of all of these expecting and lactating mothers. So a very strange thing happened when this news flashed in my friend circle. So all of them were astonished. What the hell is he doing? What is he trying to do out of his life? And what does an engineer have to do with expecting and lactating mothers? But you see, when I reached to this spot, there were many social stigmas, customary practices. For example, the umbilical cord when a child is born would be cut using the sickle that was used to cut umbilical cord of the grandfather, and both the mother and child would get tetanus at that very time, and most of the times both of them would die. So while there were many such practices and many other reasons, one of the foremost reason was that the nearest health center had access to zero electricity. So which means after daylight hours, nobody would want to undertake an institutional delivery. India was doing purely, very bad. Both UP and India was doing very bad on both maternal health and access to electricity. So you see, now a story was coming out. And the story was not just about my village. This was also about UP. This was not just about not having electricity in my house, but it was also about not having electricity in the hospital, which is nearest to you. And still, it has very minimum infrastructure even today, and it has to cater to hundreds of villages. And let me tell you that while the number of people globally who did not have access to electricity, almost 1.2 billion people in 2010, that came down to around 700 or 800 million people globally. a few years back. But unlike access to electricity, number of people who did not have access to clean cooking in 2010, almost more than 2.5 billion people, or close to 2.7 billion people globally, that number has increased more than 3 billion people now. So you see, while we are making progress on access to electricity, we are not making enough progress on access to clean cooking. And we cannot achieve the climate goals without addressing both these challenges. And the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, I will come back to this sustainable, and the term called sustainable energy for all. And there was an institution set up, you can Google about this institution, which is called the Sustainable Energy for All. So the SE for All had set 3 targets. One of them was universal access to clean energy, sustainable energy, which comprises access to electricity and access to clean cooking. And then inherently, it also includes access to electricity for productive users, which means your livelihood you should have access to livelihoods opportunities. Otherwise, where will you get fuel? How will you buy LPG? How will you pay for your electricity bills, right? So these are very well thought of concepts. And then in 2015, the same year when this Paris Agreement was signed by world leaders, although it came into being a couple of years back. So in 2015 itself, the landmark SDGs were adopted by all countries. Our Honorable Prime Minister adopted it on behalf of India. And it took us for some time to come to a conclusion and consensus on what could be the indicators of progress on SDGs. And I had the privilege of contributing to the review of indicators for SDG 7, which is goal on energy, as part of my engagement with TERI, and the SE for All's Capacity Building Hub, Global Capacity Building Hub, which was at that point of time being co-hosted by the TERI School of Advanced Studies and TERI. I also had the privilege of reviewing country action agenda and investment prospectus of several sub-Saharan African countries as part of my association with the SE for All, and particularly the Capacity Building Hub. So this is primarily my journey, wherein I have worked at the grassroots, engaged with stakeholders, right from self-help group members to village level pradhans, to state level, to the district magistrate, BDO, SDO, to state level principal secretary, energy, to the central level discourse, to international level discourse on energy access and international consultations. And now I am not working on energy access exactly, but I am more working on utility scale power plants that have to be powered using wind energy. But again, I'm not in the implementation of power plants. I'm more into the policy side of wind energy in India. Yeah. Now, we started with wind energy in the country in mid-80s. Our first public facility, first wind asset, public wind asset, and public here means government-owned windmill, was installed in 1990s, early 1990s in Tamil Nadu. Although the first deployment that happened in the country was a captive unit, and that happened in Gujarat. It was a private-owned unit. So from there, we have come long way. We have 39.6 gigawatt of wind energy installed. Until few months back, in our entire share of installed renewable energy capacity, wind energy dominated. It is only in the recent months that solar has exceeded wind. So, technically, there is not a competition between solar and wind. With your due permission, that in order to have a balanced grid, when I'm transitioning from thermal to solar or to renewable energy, if we talk about very broadly, then I also have to ensure that my grid is balanced, right? Which means that the grid code should be technically sound. And if there is an imbalance, for example, I'm not sure how many of you are aware about this global trip that happened in 2012, when all over India, especially North India, Delhi, NCR, everywhere, there was no power connection for several hours.
Yeah, so that
right?
I remember.
Yes. So it happened because of grid imbalance.
Yes.
Now, are we in a position to undertake those kind of shocks? Because our health facilities, or industries or even homes. We don't know what is the condition in our home. There might be an elderly, there might be a patient who needs a concentrator which operates on electricity, right? And if I don't have my decentralized generation, I cannot bear that kind of shock, grid failure. So I need a balanced grid. And for balancing the grid, I know that I have intermittent supply. So wherever solar falls short, wind compensates that. And whenever wind falls short, solar compensates that. And that's why the government of India has rightly legitimized the policy which is called hybrid wind solar policy, which means that apart from installing standalone solar power plants, standalone utility scale wind power plants, we will have a setup wherein we will have hybrid power plants, which means that power will be generated using both solar and wind at the same site.
Complementary of each other.
What will happen? Sorry?
Complementary of each other, right?
Absolutely. So these technologies are complementary to each other. But what eventually happens? So now because you are able to generate for a longer period of time, so your PLF eventually increases, plant load factor, right? From the same unit, same plant, when you are able to generate, say for example, only 10 billion units of electricity per year, now maybe you are able to generate 15 or 20 or 18, whatever it is, but more than what you were able to generate from a standalone plant, right? Also, you are able to ensure that your PPA contract terms are met. So ultimately, it is not just about producing electricity, feeding to the grid, and India has a light bulb everywhere. There is a business entity operating, and the business entity has to be in a profit venture, right? How will the profit improve? Profit will improve when from the same unit, I am able to produce more. Yeah. And this production will happen. What is the indicator of this production? The indicator is higher PLF. So you see that now we are moving in the age of fourth industrial revolution, right? So yes. We are going to very soon introduce, we have already introduced artificial intelligence and those kind of frontier technologies. Very soon 3D printing will be used for manufacturing wind turbines, which means that the cost as we get economy of scale will eventually come down. And few months back, there was a paper published in Nature, which again happens to be one of the most premium scientific journals. So there was a paper published, and this paper said that the cost of wind energy technology, wind power generation, is going to come down by at least 50 to 30% or even more than that in the coming years. So you see, number one, we will have higher PLF because we will be deploying much higher capacity turbines onshore, offshore. There are newer kinds of technologies also emerging, which is called floating wind, right? And at the same time, we are also advancing in terms of the capacity of individual turbines. So number one, you have newer kinds of technologies that will be introduced, which is offshore in case of India, because we haven't done anything on offshore, while other countries, the UK and others, have already done offshore. Offshore turbines have much higher PLF. They're much massive in size in comparison to the onshore turbines. And then we are also going to bring down the cost because of other factors. Number one, of course, is the PLF, but there are complementary factors. One, of course, is that we will use frontier technologies. We will become more sustainable because globally, the biggest wind manufacturers have started to talk about green growth, and they have started to talk about circular economy in the wind sector, which is still to come in the solar sector in India, relatively, in fact, in both the areas. But of course, global discussions have started happening. TERI, WRI, the Forum for Future, and few other institutions are running an India initiative which is called the Responsible Energy Initiative, about greening manufacturing in the renewable energy space. Similarly, at the global level, GVEC, NTPC, Adani, 3M, Global Solar Alliance, and few others have come together. Around 17 global energy leaders have come together, and they have launched something called Global Alliance for Sustainable Energy. And this again is directed towards greening manufacturing in the RE sector and for introducing circular economy at a much higher level, at a much massive scale. So you see, newer kinds of things are also happening in the country. And we have to be appreciative of these new kinds of things. Of course, these will be at a cost, but you also have to acknowledge the costs of today and the costs of not doing these today. So if you don't incur costs today, and if you want to, I'll set a hypothetical example here. Say, for example, we keep sitting on our 2030 450 gigawatt renewable energy installation target, installed capacity target until 2029. And if then the country's leadership, whosoever is the Prime Minister, say for example, if it is Prime Minister Modi, and he says that no worries if we did nothing until 2029, we have only installed, say for example, 100 gigawatt of renewable energy in 2021, and the rest everything we will do between 2029 and 2030. Is it possible at the same cost? Talk in a hypothetical situation. We are all aware it will not be possible, and the Prime Minister also does not want to do it in 1 year, but we are talking about a hypothetical case. So if you want to accomplish all your targets in one single year, then it will come at a premium cost, and that premium cost will be much higher. So similarly, why we have started talking about climate change? Why have we started talking about climate action? Because if we don't do it today, the cost of addressing climate change tomorrow will be much higher, because the complexity will be much higher.